There are a couple things I would like to bring up now that the game is over that would have gotten in the way of either the final boss or the end credit music. The first of which is, what is the truth? Either Ashley is the victim of his family dying before him, or he murdered some innocents during a black ops. Personally, I don't want to limit myself to just one possibility. I would prefer my backstory to have multiple choice. In all seriousness, people's lives are not usually limited to one event. More than one thing makes a human being. So I would actually say that both are equally true. It could either have been that his family's death drove him into the risk breakers, as it's been said, and then someday, summer day, under a tree, he murdered some witnesses, and then it came back to haunt him and had his breakdown. Or the alternative is he had that similar situation happen to him in reverse, Black Op, and then his family died in retaliatory strike or just unfortunate luck. Either way, it would actually probably be even more traumatizing than just one or the other being true, and why I believe that. The other is about the rude inverse. As anyone familiar with JRPGs know, when religion gets involved, it's almost entirely rendered down to picking up some sort of awesome name out of a hat. And if you're lucky, an intern or someone with English experience decides to tie it in very loosely to something that is going on, like Longinus, Abel's Lance, or the Mammon Machine. Or if they couldn't be bothered to do something else, they'll just call something Sephiroth because it sounds awesome and call it a day. However, in this case, Vagrant's story seemed quite ahead of its time, particularly about the blood sin. Guildenstern mentions it as a punishment for heretics. Common ideas today seem to agree with him, that if you flip something upside down, it suddenly becomes evil. An inverted cross is something that heavy metal bands and Satanists and things use as a rallying cry. But like a lot of things, just because a lot of people think that's how it is, doesn't mean that they're correct. An inverted cross is actually the opposite of the upright one, but it's not in terms of good and evil. Before Christ died, he appointed his disciple Peter to be his successor. Today, we consider him the first pope. The Romans obviously were none too happy with him. And while the Acts of the Apostles and things were going on 30 years later, I think 37 actually, the Romans did end up catching up to Peter, caught him, and sentenced him to death. He requested, instead of crucifixion, or to be crucified upright, he requested to be crucified upside down, feeling that he was unworthy to have the same death as the Son of God. Now, crucifixion doesn't work that way, and it honestly doesn't seem like the Romans would be eager to entertain this idea. But that is what the actual inverted cross is. It's not about good and evil. It's about the Master Christ and the servant. Now, it is hard to tell which version this game is following. And obviously, since the quote-unquote evil guy has an evil cross on his back, you might just think that, yeah, they're just, the Japanese guys are grabbing what everyone in America obviously knows is right, is that an upside-down cross is evil. But the more I thought about it, the more I actually think that Matsuno did know what he was doing. If you look at the cross on Millencamp's back on the intro movie and the jewel case for the game, her cross is actually upright. So they did actually consciously do something with this. So she's not branded with a blood sin, but a regular Yoken Rude. Personally, well, it's obviously not canon, this is my own personal opinion. I do believe that Yokus and Millenkamp may have actually been contemporaries. And the game does say that there is some time between their times. Millenkamp was around during the founding of Le Monde, and Yokus came sometime afterwards. But they may still have been around in the same generation. Millenkamp may have actually become a convert to Yokus's ideas, perhaps eventually a disciple, the one that would actually be the one to found Yokus's church. The other disciples may have turned on her and refused to accept her leadership, causing a schism and her eventual death. For example, the concept of there being a gospel written by Mary Magdalene. The one thing in-game that I use as somewhat a foundation of this theory is that in-game, the beaded anklet is described as Millenkamp's, and it has the benefit of doing damage to phantoms. those who are familiar with Acts of the Disciples know that during that, the disciples would use Jesus' name, invoke it, and drive out demons and other unclean spirits in his name. But it is just my own interpretation. But what is obviously known from the game is that Sydney was not wholly evil, and the inverted rood is definitely not bad.